Are you a binge eater looking for some obviously healthy foods to put on your naughty list? How about brown rice, quinoa and lentils? Yes kids, these are all now on the naughty list. Welcome to the nutritional hair shirt that is Whole30. To the Eating Coach. My name is Harriet Morris and I can help you see up to a 95% drop in your binge eating, compulsive overeating and make sugar addiction a non-issue. Before I get into today's content, I want to tell you that later in August I'm going to be covering emotional eating here on the podcast. This is an invitation for you to tell me about you and emotional eating. So email me. I want to know, are you an emotional eater? Tell me about your last emotional eating episode. If you've got any other thoughts or questions, what you think might help you with emotional eating. I, of course, have got lots and lots of ideas, but it's always it's like gold dust to me hearing from my listeners and about what they perceive the problems are. So my email address is info@theshiftinside.com. Drop me a line. I would love to hear from you before I put those episodes out on emotional eating. Now, on to today. I'm going to do a review of Whole30. I'll just explain briefly what Whole30 is and then why this episode might be useful to you. And it'll be useful to you, I think, even if it's not something that you would ever contemplate doing. So Whole30 is a 1-month health plan where you eliminate just so many foodstuffs, and I'll be explaining in a minute exactly what you eliminate, but it's very, very strict. And the idea is that at the end of the month you then start to reintroduce the foodstuffs that you have taken out, and you get to see what foodstuffs work for you and don't work for you. Now this sounds great on paper, I think, but it is an absolute minefield. It's a minefield for you if you have a history of food issues. So what I'm going to say is that I'm sure Whole30 works for some people. But you know what? To be blunt, I don't care about those people because they're not going to be listening to this. Those people have not got a history of food compulsion. In my opinion, Whole30 is just going to make things worse. So this episode is for you if you have tried Whole30, you've struggled and then you've blamed yourself. I really want to take that blame off your shoulders because it is not your fault. Talking about square pegs and round holes here, that is what's going on. Do not walk around carrying a burden of guilt that doesn't belong to you. And this is also a really good filter, I think, if you're not interested in Whole30, but there is another dietary program that you think, I'm interested in that. This episode will give you some good filters, some good filter questions to say, am I getting a feeling that program might try and force me into this kind of dynamic with food, for example. And if you're a big fan of Whole30 and you just want to listen to something and get irate at people dissing your favourite health plan, well, you can enjoy that as well. But you know what? This episode's not made for you. If you have done Whole30, if you've done any program and you can find that it helps you sustainably, and that's the big word here, sustainably, then I am delighted for you. We're all unique individuals. But I can tell you from 8 years of coaching people with compulsive eating and binge eating that the likelihood of Whole30 working for my listeners is just about zero, really. So let's dive in and find out what is the problem with Whole30. What I'm going to do is give you a quick rundown of the rules of Whole30 now, which I've taken from the Whole30.com website. I'm not going to give you all of them, but I really want to give you an overview here. So it says the Whole30 program rules. Yes, eat real food. And then I'm going to read all of this. The yes list, I am telling you seriously, is 2 lines, and the no list is, well, it's about 10 or 20 times the amount of information. So it says here, things you can eat: meat, seafood, eggs, vegetables, fruit, natural fats, herbs, spices, seasonings. Eat foods with a simple, recognisable list of ingredients, or no ingredients at all because they're whole and unprocessed. Then for things that you can't eat during these 30 days, first of all, do not consume sugar, real or artificial. This includes but is not limited to maple syrup, honey, agave nectar, coconut sugar, date syrup, and then it goes on and gives some examples there. No alcohol, do not eat grains, and this includes wheat, rye, barley, oats, corn, rice, millet, and it goes on and it says here, and all gluten-free pseudo cereals like quinoa. Sorry, I'm trying to stop myself laughing here. Do not eat most forms of legumes. This includes beans, chickpeas, lentils, all forms of soy, tofu. Do not eat dairy. Do not consume MSG. Do not consume baked goods, junk foods or treats with, and then in quote marks, approved ingredients. And then the last rule is do not step on the scale or take any body measurements for 30 days. So what I'm going to start with here is what is good about Whole30, and then I'll go on to my criticisms of it. So what is good is it's increasing an awareness of all the kinds of fake natural sugars that there are out there. I love anybody who says that you shouldn't eat agave nectar. I think that that's awesome, I have to say. And I really like the fact it tells you not to step on the scale or take any body measurements. Although it does say you can take photos and or measurements on day 0 and 31. And there is a problem with before and after pictures. So that's my good stuff to say about Whole30. Now let's move on to why I really do believe this is an unholy mess. The first reason that I think Whole30 is a complete disaster is that it's trying to do too much too fast. I remember when I was really compulsive, I identified one foodstuff to work on eliminating, and I didn't even eliminate that completely, and that was sugar. It was a challenge for me to do that. I remember going through a phase when I was giving up sugar and I ate more crisps or chips, if you're in the States, you'd call them. Now, that didn't last forever. It was something that I did for a few weeks. And if I'd have carried on eating crisps, then I could have dealt with that, and I would have dealt with that. But I have never managed to give up lots of things at the same time. I have had clients who've been able to do, say, they've already been on a program where they have been reducing alcohol, and then they've managed to work on sugar as well, but they'd already started working on their drinking. So the idea of just removing lots of things all at once, I mean, the clue to the disaster that is in the title. It's Whole30. This isn't whole for the rest of your life. What they're doing is they're selling you on this extreme transformation for 30 days. And there are people who can do that. And what they'll do is they'll walk away and they'll go, the Whole30 is amazing. And they might give amazing glowing testimonials on day 31. But I wonder what they're doing on day 131. It is simply too difficult to do all of that without prodding your inner food rebel. Secondly, there are foods in here that are nutritious and they balance your mood, and they are outside what Whole30 dictates as real food. It makes me really, really cross. Quinoa. Quinoa is full of protein. I don't eat it every day, but on the days when I eat it, I notice that towards the end of the day, my appetite is just, it's not there, because the protein in quinoa has done such a good job of giving me what I need nutritionally. This is a nonsense, a pseudo grain. It's food and it really, really helps. Brown rice is not allowed. I mean, brown rice. Secondly, you're allowed to drink fruit juice on Whole30. This is where I stop laughing at it and I start to get really cross now. What I'm going to do now is read from a book called Fat Chance by Dr. Robert Lustig. Dr. Robert Lustig is an expert on working with childhood obesity, and he probably knows more than anyone in the whole world about the health damage that sugar causes. So he starts off talking about a boy called Gabriel in one of these chapters, and he says, Gabriel is a 100-pound 8-year-old boy who has mildly elevated blood pressure. His father is a type 2 diabetic and has already had a gastric bypass. A dietary analysis of the family's eating habits exhibits no abnormalities, except that the father is a truck driver for the Odwalla Juice Company and is allowed to bring home as much product as he wants. Gabriel's mother limits her son to 1 glass of juice per day, but he admits to drinking 3 glasses per day. So what he's saying there is, it's orange juice that is giving this family these appalling health problems. A couple of pages later, Lustig goes on, because he's talking about the thing that you can do now is remove sweetened beverages from your diet. He says here, the health conscious among you may opt for juice over soda. For those of you who can afford it, you skip the Sunny Delight in favour of natural 100% fruit juices. They tout multiple health benefits and claim that because they are devoid of added sweeteners, they are in fact good for you. Wrong. The fruit is good for you because it contains fibre. In fact, calorie for calorie, 100% orange juice is worse for you than soda, because the orange contains 1.8 grams of fructose per ounce, while the soda contains 1.7 grams of fructose per ounce. I'm not going to go into details, I haven't got time to go into details about that, but basically fructose is incredibly bad for your health. I may come back to that on another episode. I just want to keep this very relevant. The point here is that somebody who's taking away so many things that they might crave, they could, well, on the Whole30 I'm talking about, they could replace it with orange juice, just because there's so much deprivation on this stupid programme. Replacing all of those things with orange juice is a nightmare. The next reason I hate Whole30 is that it's based on the idea of original sin. Now, it's not alone in this, and there are many programmes that share with Whole30 things that disturb me. All of my objections are good filters to put any programme through. But the idea is really that you must punish yourself for your past food choices. You can't have slip-ups. That was the idea of you are broken. It taps into people's inappropriate shame around food, when in fact, if you've been misusing food to manage your life, shame is not the right response. And I'm not just being nice to you, I'm telling you that it's not the practical response. When we've done something that we should be appropriately ashamed of, for example, if I'm in a bad mood and somebody gets in my way and I shout at them, well, yeah, I should apologise, because it's not their fault I'm in a bad mood. That's appropriate shame, which is a way of course correcting our own behaviour. Our behaviour has fallen below the standards that we expect. But binge eating is something completely different. You don't need shame, you don't need Whole30, you need curiosity. You need to think, what can I do now that will be sustainable, not just in 30 days, but in 100 days, in 300 days. And hand in hand with the idea of original sin is this denial of pleasure. So it's all part of the same thing, really. We are wired for pleasure. And what I found out when I gave up 95% of the sugar that I used to eat was I needed a sweet taste. So now I'm thinking about it, I think actually Whole30 doesn't really deny you pleasure, but it's selling you on that. It's saying you must wear this nutritional hair shirt, but if you want some orange juice, no problem. It's so sneaky and it makes me so angry. It's denying pleasure as a legitimate human right. I think that's what I mean. Next thing, it sets up a parent-child dynamic with food. Whole30 says, like so many diets out there and health programs, I know diet is a kind of 4-letter word now, but the messaging and the emotional button pushing is exactly the same. It's just dressed up differently with the new vocabulary these people are using. But this parent-child dynamic says you cannot be trusted to choose your own ingredients or make better choices. It may be that some of those foodstuffs on the list that Whole30 doesn't like that I eat, like lentils for example, it may be that lentils aren't this perfect superfood for me. But the fact is, I like lentils. They're nourishing. I know they're not the amazing source of protein that some people are trying to sell them to you as, but lentils are full of iron. And I'm a middle-aged woman. We need iron, okay? And the fact of the matter is, it takes effort to focus on those foods that you don't get on with, let's say. So for me, that's going to be most forms of processed sugar. That's going to be some processed carbohydrates. Anything bread-based, that's always difficult for me. And there's probably a few others there, but successfully cutting those things out of your life. If you're trying to think sustainably, then what's the point of going without lentils when you get, there's nothing like a lovely warming lentil soup and then you put some pesto in it. Oh, it's lovely. And I don't care that Whole30, if whoever created Whole30 was sitting here and saying, well, Harry, it's only for 30 days. I'd say, well, who cares? Who cares if you've done something that lasts 30 days? There's no point in doing something for 30 days. There's only a point in making a dietary change if you can carry on. Let me correct myself, Whole30. Your accountant is probably very happy with the fact that it's a 30-day programme, because that's what it's all about, in my opinion. It's all about profits. Human beings are really, really good at making sometimes quite extreme changes for a really short length of time. 30 days is a short length of time. And I have seen this time and time again with my clients. They come to me, they say, I have all these problems with food. And what I say to them is, you've been trying to buy into this parent-child dynamic where you are being brainwashed that you can't make your own informed food choices, that you can't learn to trust yourself like an adult. And so you go along with it because it's culturally acceptable. But guess what? Deep inside, you can't stand it. And then you rebel, but unfortunately, you rebel in the form of binge eating. Then you feel bad, then you go back to nonsense like Whole30. I just want to briefly tackle the concept of reintroduction and the fact that Whole30 sets itself up as a scientific experiment, because I have been talking a lot about how this is unsustainable. And I would imagine if the Whole30 people were here sitting with me, they would say, yes, Harriet, it's not meant to be sustainable. It's a 1-month experiment which allows you to then work out what foods don't work for you. So stop complaining about the fact that it's unsustainable. And what I would say, I would just come back to the fact that that sounds great, but it's not practical if you have a history of binge eating. Those very powerful forces that I've spoken about in this episode are going to make that experiment too difficult to do for 30 days. So as I say, those forces, I mean the fact that it sets up this dynamic, the parent-child dynamic, it's leveraging original sin, it's this denial of pleasure. And I will say, looking at the page on reintroduction here, so it's whole30.com/reintroduction, it says here, in this next phase of Whole30, you'll reintroduce the delicious foods you've been missing. And then later on, day 30, we want you to feel empowered by and confident in your Whole30 journey. Now comes the fun part, bringing back some of the food and drinks you've missed. This makes me so angry, this idea that you must have this awful month where the only benefit is how smug you feel. Now I know that if you take away a lot of foods which you may be intolerant to or even allergic to, your body's going to thank you and you're going to feel great. But your inner food rebel will not. Now, I'm not going to talk about the inner food rebel here because I have mentioned her or him or it, whatever you want to call, so often. But just in a nutshell, when you deprive yourself, as you do on Whole30, you set off something I call the metronome, which is that then you swing to excess, which is binge eating. And the energy that fuels this shift over from deprivation to excess is your inner food rebel. And I'm going to put a link to an episode I did where I was interviewing a client of mine, and it's called Louise Ends the Binge Deprivation Cycle. And that explains all about the inner food rebel and the metronome in full detail. So Whole30 is just going to set off the metronome for so many people. And that's my beef with it. Apologies for the food metaphor, can't help it. And just one last point. Compulsive eaters generally know what the food stuff is that is the most difficult for them. The amount of times I'm on a first session with people or the first time I speak to them and they say, yeah, that's it, that's the food. And they just know. They don't need to spend 30 days and get rid of everything, including their lovely lentil soup, to say, oh, you know what, it was sugar. They knew. So doesn't it make more sense to use that really obvious knowledge, because this thing is ruining your life. This thing, this one food substance is making your life hell. Isn't it better to focus on that? To focus on getting curious and experimenting and dealing with that one thing? Don't you think you're going to have more success? So that's all I want to say about reintroduction. In the next section, I'm going to be a little bit more positive and say, what can we do instead if Whole30 isn't for you? So I want to end this episode and give you something a bit more positive to focus on, because it's very easy to rant against things like Whole30. But if that's not the answer, then what is? Well, what I want to say to you here is that food freedom is something entirely different from what Whole30 is offering. And ironically, is a way to make you actually feel whole. Remember I said earlier about Whole30 being based on original sin? Well, so many of my clients are walking around feeling, when they come to me, they're feeling they're not enough, that they are not whole. And the work that I do actually allows them to achieve that while dismantling their compulsion. So what is food freedom? Food freedom is, first of all, swapping guilt and shame and these extreme nutritional hair shirt programs like Whole30 for curiosity, for experimentation. You see, when you experiment and you say, do you know what, I'm going to try going without X, Y and Z for X number of days, you can't fail with that. You can only get a result. You can only get data. And you might not like the data, but it's useful. So for example, if you've got a very heavy 2 weeks coming up and you might have exams coming up, or work is particularly draining, or there's a family situation going on, that's probably not a time that you want to say, oh, I'm going to give up 95% of the sugar that I've been eating. But if you say, oh, I'm going to go ahead and do that because I need to wear my nutritional hair shirt and I've been a bad girl or a bad boy, and then guess what? Everything's really stressful, it's the wrong time, and it doesn't work. If you treat that as a test and a way for you to be good when you've been bad, you're going to end up feeling worse. If you treat it as an experiment, you say to yourself, okay, I need to change the conditions. I may need to shorten the experiment because 14 days, that feels like too much. I tell you the power in no and low commitment. I had times when I gave up sugar, I had times when I thought, I don't think I can go the next 5 minutes. And I came up with ways to deal with those 5 minutes. And those ways were so powerful. I felt so amazing. I had this surge of, this is amazing, I can do it. If you're interested, those techniques I came up with are called Cravings Busters, and they're in my Freedom from Sugar program, and I'll put a link in the show notes to that. Food pleasure is allowing yourself to relax enough to get real pleasure from nutritious food instead of the fake pleasure of junk. But also, you know what? Real pleasure is having an imperfect diet. I do sometimes eat junky carbs. Not of the sugar kind, because that I'm not going down that road and I work too hard with that. But there are other form of junky carbs that I do eat sometimes. But because I have changed the role that junk food plays in my life and I have no need to use it as a life manager, having those junky carbs doesn't set off this like, I must have more. And you can get to that place, but you're not going to get to it doing things like Whole30. And food freedom is being present. It's being present with yourself when you eat. Because my guess is that you are using food to escape yourself. And we need to put food out of that job. And one of the ways we do that is by being present with ourselves. I haven't got time to go into that today, but that's definitely something that I work with clients. So that's what I want to inspire you with this episode, is these words, these ideas of curiosity, of experimentation, being present, imperfectionism, being neutral with yourself about some choices which may not have served you. Whole30 offers none of those things. But if you're listening to this and you're thinking, no, I've pulled towards it, I really want to do it, please let me do Whole30. I'd say go and do it, but whatever might happen to you in that time, whether you sabotage it or it's perfect, is that 30 days going to be worth it for what is happening to you after 100 days? And the best answer to that question, apart from obviously going and doing it, the best answer to that question is things that you've done in the past, because Whole30 has got so many things in common with all of the diets and the programs that take your power away from you, that put you in this parent-child dynamic, that demand perfection from you. You, a beautiful, beautifully imperfect human being who I'm going to guess is being far too hard on herself or himself. So I'm just going to leave you with that thought on Whole30 and why I believe it is one hell of an unholy mess. So that's it from another episode of The Eating Coach. If you are interested in working one-to-one with me, just go to theshiftinside.com/coaching. A reminder, if you want to email in and talk to me about any of your issues with emotional eating, just let rip on the email. I would love to hear from you. And that email address, one more time, is info@theshiftinside.com. So, all that remains for me to say is this is Harriet Morris, the eating coach, saying over and out. And remember, even if the idea of doing Whole30 is about as doable for you as it would be for me to retrain as a gymnast open an agave nectar processing plant, or join Elon Musk in his insane mission to Mars. Don't worry, because you can reclaim your life from food. I'll be back in 2 weeks. Bye bye for now.